Hello, everybody, and welcome to Maritime Innovations. I'm Joachim Rosenegger, and today I'm speaking with Professor Jan Emblemsvåg of NTNU in Ålesund, who leads a NuProShip project on nuclear propulsion for shipping. About 2 weeks ago in Ålesund, Professor Emblemsvåg brought regulators, classification societies, ship owners, and researchers into one room to ask a question the industry has avoided for decades. Can nuclear power realistically drive the ships of the future? Today we want to look at what comes after the conference, the roadmap, the money, the rules, and where this leaves Europe and Asia. Professor Emblemsvåg, thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Professor, the conference on June 9th brought regulators, class, ship owners, researchers into one room. Now that the dust has settled, what is the single most important thing that changed because of the conference?
Well, the conference, like you say, we bring together a lot of diverse people, and we have the nuclear vendors, we have ship builders, we have ship designers, we have really the whole range. And to address this question, it's very important to work on a high level of specificity. Simply because one size will not fit all. And we need to talk about specific ship types, specific trades, specific reactor types, and so on, to make this a practical and useful discussion. Otherwise, we'll soon end up in this more lofty conceptual discussions with a lot of if, then, else, and that is fine to some extent, but in order to actually have results, we need to get down to the more practical things.
I mean, when I talk to people about this fascinating topic, the number one question that comes up, is it safe? So, is it safe?
Yes, and let me just expand on that. When we selected the reactor technologies, we developed more than 30 criteria for what it would take to have a viable nuclear propulsion solution. And of course, safety is one of those criteria. And of course, people associate probably, I think, nuclear propulsion with naval nuclear propulsion technologies. But what people must keep in mind is that many of those reactors are actually generation 2 that require active management. Some of the modern ones have probably passive safety, but there are entirely different reactor technologies than the one we are working on. And I've just mentioned a couple of terms, passive safety. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if you need to shut down a reactor with passive safety, the safety mechanism is handled by basically laws of nature, such as gravity mechanisms and natural circulation and many of these physical phenomena that doesn't require any people to manage. They just take place by the fact that they're there. And this reduces the risk enormously. And we also have a couple of reactor solutions where we could actually talk about intrinsic safety, which is even better. That means that the reactor itself has something called negative reactivity, which means that when you increase the power production, the increase is less and less and less and less, and in the end, it will actually not go any further, regardless, even if you try. So, for example, the molten salt reactor has a typical operating temperature around 550 and upwards to maybe 700, depending on the type. However, the molten salt itself boil at 1600 something degrees. And then the point with the negative reactivity is that it can never reach 1600 degrees. In fact, it will most likely never reach 800 degrees. So the physics in the reactor core itself prevent any kind of runaway situation that people associate, I think, with the old generation 2 reactor technologies that we remember from Chernobyl and these places. So this is entirely different technologies.
I understand. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. The NuProShip aims to have 2 to 3 prototype ships in commercial operation by 2035. 2 demonstration concepts are on the table. So the nuclear LNG tanker with Knutsen OAS and the offshore vessel with Island Offshore. Where do these projects stand today in June 2026?
We have, when it comes to the Island Offshore project, we have now applied for funding to actually set up an electric test reactor. And an electric test reactor, that means that we have the whole reactor system with the pressure vessel and the heat exchangers, the whole thing. But it's not nuclear fuel inside the reactor that generate the heat. It's electricity and gas. So we just artificially kind of heat it up, and then we would like to see exactly how it works. When it comes to the other one, that work has already been done by Kairos Power in the US. And Kairos is now building the test reactor, which actually will be nuclear, as far as I understand, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So it's being built as we speak. And of course, that is a huge step forward, because if that reactor works as it should, that means the next step would be what we can call marinization. And for that, the Tessera Atomic company has been formed to do the marinization of these technologies. And that reactor will then go into the LNG carrier. And of course, what we're looking for there now is that we need to find a cargo owner with the LNG carrier. So we have concrete specifications to work with. And the same also applies to the Island Offshore ship. We need a cargo owner there who can come with very concrete specification, so that we don't develop something that the market will say, oh, no, we can't use it like that. We thought you would make it like this, so yeah. Also, we are starting now to basically set up these demonstration projects and start moving forward.
So the technology picture is clearly maturing. What usually decides the pace, though, apart from the legal frameworks, isn't physics, it's finance. So let's talk money. You've said repeatedly that the barriers are no longer the technical, but the commercial and political. So who pays for the first nuclear-powered merchant vessel, and what does the business case look like compared to ammonia and methanol?
Yes, very good question. And this is a lot like chicken and the egg. And the cost of developing a nuclear reactor is somewhere in the range between $1 and $2 billion US. And of course, the companies who do this work, they need to recuperate that kind of investment. And of course, then the big question is, how much of that development cost do they want to recuperate on item number 1, 2, 10, 15, 20, or whatever? And this is where the chicken and the egg comes in. If we were able to have a larger order book, then this will be a very easy way. Then you can just distribute those development costs over the large number of reactor units. But of course, but people need also to have a price, and they would like to see it in operation. And therefore, these demonstration projects are launched to actually provide a demonstration. And there are plenty of soft funding, actually. We have the EU Innovation Fund, who is looking at how to cut CO2 emissions. And of course, the great thing about these ships is that there will literally be no emissions. And with that kind of improvement, the soft funding is actually sufficient to make this first few ships a reality. Once we have achieved, let's say, 15, 20 units sold, we expect the cost to be about 80% lower than what the nuclear industry refer to as the first of a kind reactor unit. And that cost will be significantly lower than anything green ammonia or whatever. Today, and actually it will be cheaper than fossil fuels. As far as I know, we don't have any green alternative fuels today that can compete with fossil fuels. We haven't done our one-to-one calculation on green ammonia versus nuclear, simply because there are no green ammonia who is even remotely close to fossil fuel, while we are actually looking at beating fossil fuel on cost. So I think the economics here are very attractive, but of course the chicken and the egg on the first vessel and the first 15 vessels, that will be a very important thing, and we don't have everything figured out on that part yet.
Let's talk about regulation and port access. So the NS Savannah, for example, failed in the 1960s not because of the technology, but because of port access and administrative burden. What is fundamentally different this time?
Well, Savannah had a Generation 2 reactor, so you were into this active safety issues. And that, of course, gave the regulators in the ports reason to worry. And with worry, a long, protracted process is the result. Our technologies, however, we have built safety in as a part of the design. And also we have triso fuel. So even if the ship goes down, it has another layer of safety. And the triso fuel can withstand seawater for, even warm seawater, for around 10,000 years. And if it's colder seawater, like 20 degrees, 100,000 years. And if it's very cold, like around 3 degrees, which is typical on the deeper part of the ocean, it might even sustain for maybe even 1,000,000 years. That study has not been done yet for such long-term, low, cold and high pressure water. So the safety case, the environmental risk case, is very different than what Savannah faced. And we then hope that there will be a few ports that are willing to let us demonstrate this technology. And then if that can be achieved, then we basically believe that seeing is believing. People will see that this technology works. They will start to read up on the safety, the passive safety, intrinsic safety. They will read up on the triso fuel, and then they will see that, most likely, to be honest, I think that this technology will be the safest ever on this high seas, even safer than the sails, because with sails you had a lot of ships going down because, hitting shorelines and stuff. And here we are talking about the technology that literally has no pollution potential because of the triso fuel. It has an incredible safety record, or not yet, but it will have because of the safety mechanism. So as far as I see it, it will only be the cargo that is being transported that will represent a risk for the ports and for the environment at large.
I mean, I don't know if the policymakers see it the same way. So I would like to ask if there's a risk that Europe regulates slowly or too slowly while other regions move faster on this topic. And
I've actually talked to 7 ports. Only one of them was slightly negative. Several of them were extremely positive. And the main argument that they had concerning this was that with nuclear power, they can get rid of the fossil fuel storages, which today represent a major risk for a port. I mean, just imagine having millions of liters of heavy fuel oil or diesel oil or something like that stored. That is a much higher risk for them. And also, like one of them pointed out, that it will also free up a lot of area for them. Because these ships, they will not come into a port and require fueling. So they just deliver the cargo, take new cargo and leave, which is a major improvement for the ports.
Can we expect that the ones who are moving first, that they are going to sell power to European or Western ports?
Yes, so that is also something that we have discussed, reverse shore power. Basically, when the ship comes in, instead of powering down the nuclear reactor, they just deliver power to the grid. Or perhaps more realistically, they might power assets on the port itself. For example, if you are to pump a lot of oil or whatever, you need pumps that require, substantial amount of power. That can be then provided by the ship itself instead of the grid, for example. Yeah. But reverse shore power, that we haven't looked into details, but it is definitely an interesting concept, yes.
Given my background from cybersecurity, I have to ask about this as well. So a nuclear-powered merchant ship is, for me, a floating critical infrastructure asset. So how do you protect it physically against piracy, sabotage, and especially digitally against attacks on the nuclear control systems?
Yeah, so we have a company in the consortium called Semper, and they have a technology used by the US nuclear forces actually on which is extremely difficult to hack. So we're quite sure that hacking the links will be pretty much impossible. The ship itself, of course, represents a risk. There we have multiple layers of defense. First, the first layer of defense is actually that these ships can go faster. So they're not easy to catch up with. If, let's say, pirates catch up with them, then there are citadels in the ship that can, where the crew can be, and they can actually manage the ship from the citadel. And then, even if they did manage to get into the citadel, which is a steel hardened, very difficult to get into, then still they have 1 meter of concrete, steel reinforced concrete, before they can get into the nuclear reactor. And then, in the end, they have the nuclear reactor and finally the trisofuel, which also makes misuse of uranium very difficult. So there are so many layers of defense here that by the time anyone comes even remotely close to having a fair shot at getting hold of the nuclear material, then the crew could, for example, take the ship out into the wider ocean, which would make helicopters highly impossible to use. And then they would just have to wait for authorities, for example, to arrive. And so I've talked to people on the nuclear regulatory side. They view this as a very small risk, really. But of course, we have to be prepared for it, which is why we have all these layers of defense to handle it.
We have to talk about China, I guess. China is developing its own nuclear shipping concepts, including large container vessel designs from CSSC. How do you see China's role here? Partner, competitor, pacesetter, maybe?
Yeah, they're definitely a competitor in the sense that we would like to be early movers on this. Such competition, I think, is very healthy. That's very good. And I wish them the best of luck to manage, but we'll hopefully beat them. Yes.
Very good. Yeah.
But I do think we have a couple of benefits, though, and that is that we are trying to do this in a very transparent, in a well understood way, engaging stakeholders, authorities, and we try to approach this in a wider way than at least as far as I understand, the Chinese are doing. To me, it looks like the Chinese are working at this largely as a technical issue alone. And on that note, I think they will probably beat us on the technical side, coming first. But there's so much more to this. So we are more, let's say, we are hurrying ourselves slowly to make sure that we don't do anything that is not proper or whatever. It has to be transparent. It has to be trustworthy by the general public, etc., etc. And I think we can do that. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, let's try to have an outlook. So let's say it's June 2035, 9 years from now. Describe the scene. Where are we and what are we looking at?
Yes, a very good question. I hope that we have maybe 3 demonstration vessels by then. We are working on a third one also as we speak. These vessels will then hopefully show the world that this can be done in a very safe and proper way, according to all kind of regulations and insurance and all these things. And then I think that the maritime industry will basically come with a very heavy mass, so to speak. It's a big industry. And if we then can have a larger number of orders being placed, that will enable the vendors here to plan production in a very smart way. And then I think it should be possible to get out a significant number of ships before 2040. How many? It's very difficult to say, but maybe 100, I don't know, by 2040. And then from there on, it will pick up.
Professor Emblemsvåg, thank you so much for your time today and all these insights. It's fascinating to see that from the Blue Maritime cluster in the Sunnmøre region, there's so much innovation going on, and it's always good to report. I'm looking forward to the next meetings and to the next stories. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you.